Lakeland Currents, your public affairs program for north central Minnesota. Production funding for Lakeland Currents is made possible by Bemidji Regional Airport, serving the region with daily flights to Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. More information available at bemidjiairport.org. Closed captioning for Lakeland Currents is sponsored by Nisswa Tax Service, tax preparation for businesses and individuals. Online at nisswatax.com.
Hello again, friends. I'm Jason Edens, your host of Lakeland Currents. Thanks for joining the conversation today, and thanks for your ongoing support of Lakeland Public TV. Here in Minnesota, we spend a lot of time talking about hunting and fishing. Hook and bullet, fin and feather, for many of us, it's part of our DNA. However, we don't spend nearly as much time talking about non-game wildlife species, which is why I'm excited to welcome Amy Westmark to the conversation today. Amy is the Non-Game Wildlife Specialist based in Bemidji. Amy, welcome to the program, and thanks so much for making time today.
Yeah, hi Jason, it's good to be here.
So first of all, what's the mission of the Non-Game Wildlife Program for those people that don't know?
Sure. The mission of the Non-Game Program is to protect, to maintain, and enhance, and to restore Minnesota's non-game wildlife resources for their intrinsic value, their ecosystem functions, their long-term benefits, and for public enjoyment in particular.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, I've been curious in preparation for our conversation, what exactly constitutes a game versus a non-game wildlife species? So just in the past week or two in Wisconsin, nearly 200 wolves were taken as part of a new wolf hunt. Here in Minnesota, is the wolf non-game or is it a game species?
The wolf in Minnesota is considered a game species, and many I don't think are familiar with the distinction. So in Minnesota, all species that you can hunt or fish or trap are considered game species. The wolf has had hunting seasons in the past. Even though there's not a current season, it is still considered a game species. Non-game species are diverse in our state. There are many non-game species, some which we're more familiar with, and some which are less common and many folks are a little less familiar with. But non-game species include birds, reptiles, amphibians, mammals, fish, invertebrates, things like bees, butterflies, even mussels. And so that is a wide diversity of species, hundreds of species that are native to Minnesota, but are not considered to be game species. So all of those fall under the purview of the Non-Game Wildlife Program.
I learned on your website that there are nearly 2,000 non-game wildlife species that are native to Minnesota. So that represents a ton of work. Tell us about one of your success stories in the Non-Game Wildlife Program.
Sure. The Non-Game Wildlife Program has been around for over 40 years. And in that time, some of the success stories that you're referring to include species like the eagle, our state bird, the common loon, trumpeter swans, ospreys, peregrine falcons, eastern bluebirds. All of these species once saw great declines in the state, or were almost entirely gone from Minnesota. And work from the Non-Game Program, along with other agencies and interested partners in the state, has been instrumental in the recovery of those species. And it's hard to think now that many of these species are so common that they could have been almost a rare sighting in the state a number of years ago, but they have come a long way. So those are some of the successful partnerships that the Non-Game Program has been a part of over the years. And it's really cool to be a part of a program that has that background and that history. So.
Now, when you say partnerships, Amy, who are you referring to? With whom is the DNR partnering on behalf of our non-game wildlife species?
Yeah, so partners come in a lot of different shapes and sizes. We partner with external agencies, federal agencies, the Fish and Wildlife Service, for instance. The non-game program partners with other state agencies, with other divisions within the DNR, with nonprofits. I think of the Trumpeter Swan Society when it came to swan reintroduction. We also partner with and rely on the citizens of Minnesota. So the program, the Non-Game Wildlife Program, is quite unique in that it's almost entirely funded by donations from Minnesotans. Most of the DNR is funded by the general fund or by license sales and taxes. The Non-Game Wildlife Program is 80% of our funding comes from donations. So those are primarily given to the non-game program at tax time. There's what we call the non-game wildlife checkoff. That is an option on everyone's income tax forms that gives Minnesotans a chance to help partner with us to support our native wildlife species. So we use those funds to leverage more funding from state and federal grants to increase our potential, to support non-game species in the state.
Interesting. So,
yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, please.
I was just going to say the program is really unique, and it's probably the largest and most successful non-game wildlife program in the nation. So I think it's something that Minnesotans can and should be proud of.
In the nation? That's interesting. So you would describe the Minnesota DNR's non-game wildlife program as one of the most successful in the country. Why is that? What distinguishes it from other programs?
The amount of support that we get from our citizens is more than many states have to work with. So the generous donations of Minnesotans give us resources to be able to accomplish more than other states, maybe have to work with. And other state agencies are set up in different ways. So we are housed within the Minnesota DNR, Department of Natural Resources. Other states may have non-game wildlife programs that are set up in different capacities than ours. And so it gives us the opportunity to work with other divisions within the DNR to do a lot of good within the state.
Interesting. So does that number oscillate at all from year to year? The amount of support that you're getting from Minnesotans, does that oscillate from year to year, or is it pretty consistent? Can you depend on it?
It has remained fairly consistent. I've been only with the program here for about a year. And so I don't have as much of a background with the history, sure. But it's my understanding that the program funding through donations has been fairly consistent throughout the years. I think one thing that we've seen is we've had fewer donations, but folks are donating more when they do donate. So we seem to be working with it's about $1 million that folks give a year.
You know, I've always wondered about conservation officers. Obviously, conservation officers are also stewards of our wildlife. To what extent do they support the non-game wildlife program? Do they have a role? Do they have any enforcement authority within your program?
Sure, we work directly with the DNR conservation officers. There are state and federal laws that protect some species of non-game wildlife. And so we work with our conservation officers to enforce those laws. An example of that would be Migratory Bird Treaty Act. Migratory birds have protections in our country, and our officers do have authority to maintain and uphold those protections. So they do help us out. We work together with them quite closely.
Okay. Well, what about threatened species in Minnesota right now? You mentioned that the conservation officers might lean in if there's a species that's particularly threatened. Can you tell us a little bit about the status of some of our iconic species here in Minnesota, or lesser known species?
Sure, yeah. I'm glad you brought it up. That's a priority to the Non-Game Wildlife Program. So just an important distinction, there are species that are listed within the state as endangered, threatened, or special concern. Those are different classifications based on how at risk their populations are to disappearing, or their habitat is to disappearing. So some species may be listed within the state of Minnesota that are not listed federally, or vice versa. Some species that we might see here in northwestern Minnesota, maybe that folks are familiar with, would include the Blanding's turtle. That would be kind of in the southeastern portion of northwestern Minnesota. They have a larger range across the rest of Minnesota. They are a listed species in the state, and one that we are conducting monitoring and research projects on. A lot of that work is ongoing work, and much of it is happening outside of northwestern Minnesota, but they are listed as a threatened species within the state. Folks may be familiar with the northern long-eared bat. They are actually listed as special concern here in Minnesota. They are federally listed as threatened. Here in the Northwest, we monitor a couple of listed species, including piping plover. They have historically been active nesters up on Lake of the Woods, and they are both state and federally listed. Also on Lake of the Woods is the common tern, and they are a listed species in Minnesota as well.
What about aquatic invasive species? I'm curious, whose jurisdiction does that fall under? Is that something that your office is involved in monitoring, or who's really responsible for that at the statewide level?
So we do have an aquatic invasive species program, and that is separate from non-game wildlife. Okay. So their focus is on, of course, non-native species to the state of Minnesota, whereas ours would be on native species. So where we would interact would be when a non-native species is impacting a native non-game species.
Sure. So I think you mentioned mussels earlier in our conversation. Would that be an example where you might collaborate with some of your colleagues elsewhere in the state to ensure that the mussels that are endemic to Minnesota, their populations can thrive?
Yes, definitely. We coordinate closely with fisheries on mussel populations. mussels rely on fish species as for a part of their life cycle. And so we want to work closely with our partners in fisheries when we are doing work, especially work with rare species of mussels. And with any species of concern, whether they be threatened or endangered species, part of what we do in non-game is to review projects. Maybe they be state projects that other divisions within the DNR have planned, or outside of the department, projects that could impact native non-game species. We closely review those projects as we're able and provide comments and guidance and direction on how to best protect our native non-game species.
You know, I'm glad you brought that up, Amy, because I was actually going to ask you about the Minnesota Wildlife Plan, which is a part of the Nongame Wildlife Program. And
Yep.
in it, it says that one of the things that's a priority is reducing habitat fragmentation. So my question for you is, do you ever feel that different parts of the DNR are at odds with one another in terms of your objectives? Do you ever feel that DNR forestry or other divisions are making your job at non-game wildlife more difficult?
Each division of the DNR has slightly different goals. And a part of my job is to provide technical guidance to other divisions on how to accomplish those goals while keeping non-game wildlife in mind. And so a lot of the technical guidance that I do is with our other divisions in the DNR to make sure that we're considering non-game resources in our other efforts. So like forestry, like you mentioned.
Sure. So it's my understanding that there are about 10 non-game wildlife specialists throughout the state. What backgrounds do you all have in order to work in this environment? I'm sure that it's not monolithic, but can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. So you're right. We have about 10 staff members. We have 2 specialists for the most part in each region of the state. We have 4 regions. So we have 2 full-time staff in the Northwest, and the same is true for our 3 other regions. And then we have a handful of staff in St. Paul that do coordination and our grants work and statewide education programming. Most of us come from wildlife backgrounds. I most recently worked for the DNR for the Division of Wildlife, and recently transitioned into non-game. Many of my colleagues have worked outside of Minnesota for other, fish and game departments with a wide variety of species. So everyone brings to the table a different background in wildlife, which is really useful. So we can all work as part of a team, and we have, a wide variety of skill sets to draw from.
Mm-hmm. I didn't realize there was another division of wildlife. So that's separate from non-game wildlife.
Correct. Yep. So non-game wildlife is a part of what's called the Division of Ecological and Water Resources.
Okay.
And that's quite a large division. But separate from that is the Division of Wildlife. And that's where all of the game management is done. So all of those animals that you can hunt and trap.
Okay, that makes sense. Well, you mentioned ecological and water surveys, and one of the things I was curious about is how do you actually know how many species are in a given part of the state or throughout the state? Is there some sort of ecological survey that takes place regularly?
We do have within the DNR what is called the Minnesota Biological Survey. And that program is a group of staff, highly specialized staff, who have basically canvassed the state and surveyed for species of plants and animals and documented where they are. So that's been a long-term survey effort, and they are mostly done with the survey, with the statewide survey at this point. So that effort gave us a good idea or snapshot, at least, of where species are and where they're not within the state. And we draw from the data collected from the biological survey to make decisions on where to focus some of our conservation efforts.
So like the census, does that happen every 10 years or how often do you do that?
The biological survey effort was a one-time pass through the state. And from there, what we're doing is taking a look at a more prioritized list of species and revisiting locations for more surveys and monitoring. And that a lot of that work falls onto the non-game wildlife staff, but we still have Minnesota Biological Survey staff, and we work closely with them. So they are, for wildlife, we have staff who are focused on invertebrate biology, ornithology, herpetology within the Minnesota Biological Survey. So they're more specialists, I would call them. And the non-game staff work closely with those staff in our regions to do surveys and monitoring.
Are there species in Minnesota, or are there species that were in Minnesota that have been extirpated that you think can be brought back and populations can be reestablished in our state?
There are a couple of species that come to mind in Northwest Minnesota, or formerly from Northwest Minnesota. Excuse me, the Burrowing Owl, which was a prairie dwelling species, hasn't been documented in a while in the state, as well as a small species, a small mammal known as the Richardson's ground squirrel, or flickertails, people know them as. They still inhabit Northwest Minnesota, but in small, colonies, and there are very few of them left. And so those are prairie dwelling species. With the loss of our prairies over time, we haven't been seeing those species, or at least not in the number that we used to be. With the return of our prairies, perhaps we will see a return of those types of species. I guess with that said, the Richardson's ground squirrel is one that we have been monitoring in the Northwest. We know of a couple colonies that remain, and we're always looking for sightings of more. So if people happen to know where more are, we're always keeping our eyes out for them. They are seen most commonly in grazed pastures. And so when we hear from folks who have seen them, it's out in the cow pasture somewhere.
Interesting. Well, Amy, we only have about a minute left, and I still got a couple quick questions for you here. One of which is, when there are large infrastructure projects in the state, such as mining or Line 3, To what extent is the Nongame Wildlife Program involved in assessing the environmental impact of those infrastructure projects?
We review environmental impact statements and provide comments on the impacts to non-game wildlife that we see happening as a result of those projects. There are a lot of projects for us to review, and some of them take more time than others and are more of a priority, but particularly those projects where there are species of threatened, listed species, those that are threatened, endangered, or special concern. When we see impacts or potential impacts to those species, then those are cases where we get involved and provide some recommendations for how to avoid detrimental, impacts to those species.
So just two more quick questions. One of which is, how else can citizens get involved in the Nongame Wildlife Program aside from simply making a donation?
I'm glad you asked. We have a couple of projects statewide that we are always looking for volunteers to help with. First of all, you can go to our website and look for volunteer opportunities anytime. We have 2 loon monitoring projects that we're always looking for volunteers to help us with. One of those programs, the Minnesota Loon Monitoring Program, focuses in Becker and Otter Tail counties. And we need about 250 volunteers every year to make that happen. And so we're always looking for people. And there's a second loon monitoring program called the Loon Watcher Survey. Anyone anywhere in the state can help us out with that if they live on a lake or like to frequent the lakes. That's very helpful. I'm also annually looking for reports of mud puppies. We have concerns with mud puppy health issues, mud puppy populations, particularly between Detroit Lakes and Alexandria. We're lucky enough to have this large species of salamander in this part of the state. And occasionally we see die-offs and we're trying to figure out why. So I ask if folks see them to give me a call and let me know so we can figure out
that's very
what's
specific.
going on. Yeah.
Great. Well, the last question I have for you, Amy, is I'm just curious, what's your personal outlook for the health and well-being of our biodiversity here in Minnesota?
I am optimistic about the health of and well-being of our species in Minnesota, in part because of the energy and the support that I feel from, or that I get from those Minnesotans that do support programs such as the Nongame Wildlife Program. I think we're lucky that we have a state full of people who appreciate wildlife, and that goes a long way. And so I'm hopeful that we'll continue to retain our diversity of wildlife into the future.
Well, thank you for your part in that. And thank you so much for joining me today, Amy. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. It's good to meet with you.
Likewise. And thank all of you for joining me once again. I'm Jason Edens, your host of Lakeland Currents. Be kind and be well. We'll see you next week.